Hi, I'm Andy Acton.
And I'm Chris Strevens.
This is Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. A slightly different guest today.
Yeah, it was, I thought, very interesting, very enlightening. And yeah, as you say, a little bit sort of off-piste in the fact it was about health and well-being and from a physical, mental point of view. I thought it was really good. I think there's some quite good little lessons in there.
I think people could quickly look at this episode, not listen to it, and go, he's a PT guy.
Yeah.
But actually, it's worth listening to.
Yeah, because he's not a PT guy.
Definitely not. It's about, sure, there's a health and well-being element in there, but there's also nutrition and there's mindset. And I thought the bit that really was fascinating was that how people give 100% at work, but you also need to have 100% left for home. And it's how do you match that off to make sure you've got enough energy to enjoy your time away from work, but also give all you need to at work. And you don't neglect one or the other.
I think also what's quite cool, and I think it will appeal to and resonate with our dentist, is he comes from a science background.
Yes.
So therefore it's not just like 50 press-ups and, hey, you look like someone from Baywatch. It's there's some real science behind it.
Yeah. And
that was great.
And from his side, that kind of pre-qualifying of people to make sure
that
they understand what position they're in, they understand what he can do, and they also talk about what the outcomes are going to be. And actually, there is a bit of dentistry in there, isn't there? If you think about when dentists are talking to their patients about what they're going to try and achieve, there's some parallels. I think people find it a really interesting episode.
Well, it's different. I think it's a different one.
Yes. Here we are again. It's Monday morning. It's 7:00. So that must mean...
I reckon it's podcast time.
I think it might be.
I'm looking forward to this one because this is going to be a healthy podcast. See what I did there?
Nicely done.
Linked all together with working.
Exactly.
Actually, there should be some good nuggets in this, actually, for a profession that suffers from terribly bad backs and terribly bad necks.
I think so. So let's introduce our guests and we'll have our conversation. So today we're joined by George Vernon, and George is a health and wellness coach. How you doing, George? You well?
Very, very well. Andy, Chris, thank you both for having me on. I seriously do appreciate it.
We're looking forward to having the conversation. I think as Chris was saying, it's right. The profession suffers. It's not a particularly mobile job. They don't kind of get their steps in because they're in a surgery.
No, definitely not.
Sometimes they're grabbing food in a 15, 20-minute slot in the afternoon that might end up being a meal deal, which probably isn't great. So there's lots of things that are kind of conspiring against them to stay kind of healthy and fit in the more holistic sense. So it'd be nice to have a conversation to find out a bit more about things they can do. But to start with, George, there's often clues from our childhood to lead us to what the people we are today. Go back to your childhood. Tell us what your upbringing was like. Where was that? What did it look like?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I've literally still in the same village as I've always lived in, moved down the road with my girlfriend. We're living together in the centre of the village now and above a coffee shop that we both used to go to after school. So I've been with my girlfriend for 10 plus years now. But to reverse all the way back to my childhood, it was a very good one, fantastic one. The thing for me, because people often look for limitations in childhood, that kind of is what allow you to be successful and excel a little bit later on, probably came more from a fear element. And I'm not sure if anybody who's listening can relate, but I was always a little bit more on the anxious side, a little bit more on the fearful side at school. And even though I did have a fantastic childhood, that was just something that was just always there. I'm not quite sure why. I'm sure if I spent hours with a psychiatrist, they'd tell me.
Yeah, some trauma occurred somewhere along the line.
Yeah. But I mean, so it was always a more fearful element. And that for me was alleviated through my time boxing. So I kind of see my childhood as before boxing and then after boxing was kind of the two splits that I see it as. And before boxing, I was very quiet. I worried a lot. I was far more reserved. Whereas after boxing gave me that vehicle to move away from that fear.
What age were you then?
I was going to say, when did you start boxing?
I was 11 when I first went into a boxing gym.
And why boxing?
To get fit for football. So it was truthfully, it was my dad who took me. And I'd always... I'd always had this want to, be a little bit tougher. Obviously, that driven from that kind of fear aspect of things. I wanted to be a bit tougher. I wanted to be able to be able to defend yourself, as I'm sure probably most kids do that age as well, being at school. So it was something that I'd always leaned towards. I'd done a bit of karate, but boxing was just a vehicle to get fit for football, because I had the dream of being a professional footballer, as a lot of people probably do. And I fell in love with boxing because of just how much I enjoyed it, how much it gave me that vehicle away from some of the fears, and just that I kind of started to really see this link between action and reward. So it was like my input, my ability to just take action and work was directly correlated to the results that I got. And I really saw that staring me in the face in a boxing gym.
So you started doing the boxing for fitness to support your football, but did the boxing then overtake the football and become the thing that you pursued?
Exactly that, yeah. I finished football probably a year after I started to boxing, just because of how much I enjoyed it.
Wow. Must be quite good boxing confidence. I mean, I can remember trying to do boxing in my garage, not literally in my garage, but in the gym in the garage, and I really enjoyed it. My wife absolutely loves it. She goes completely bonkers because she says it's quite. You use actually more muscles than you think you use, don't you? Do you know what I mean? It's quite an interesting one, really. You think it's just punching, but actually it's not. And I suppose also when you were doing this, did that then give you? I don't quite know how to put it really, but with other people in the school, was there a certain degree of sort of respect for you that came with it, in the fact that you could probably knock them out in one go or something?
I think that was a large part of it early doors, and it was actually an identity that I couldn't quite let go of after years went on. So I was doing it. I did it for so many years competitively, and then I coached it as well. So everybody kind of knew me, as well as being a coach, as boxing. So yeah, there was definitely that respect element, and it was also, as you say, like the muscles that you use is just ridiculous. I remember the first session that I ever did in boxing. I think the next day when I woke up aching from it, I was nearly crying because it was just that.
And all for football.
Yeah.
All for football.
and in your time in boxing, obviously you went into it for fitness. The other people around you, what were their motivations to get involved in it? Because like you say, it's fitness, it's protection, it's an energy outlet. I guess there's loads of different reasons for it. Is it because I think boxing's become quite, I guess, fashionable in some ways, in terms of a modern way to keep fit.
Yeah.
But has it shifted in the time you've been involved?
Definitely. Where I started was at a leisure centre initially, and then I very quickly got asked to go into the city centre gym. And the city centre gym was a far different environment than the leisure centre. I mean, I live pretty much in the countryside, and the city centre in Wolverhampton boxing gym was a far tougher environment, and the people in there were there for, as you've identified, multiple different reasons, for fitness, to get them out of trouble.
I was going to say, is it like one of those films, when you sort of see the bloke goes down the boxing, go and see the people in the boxes, they're like, there's a whole random bunch of different people.
Yeah.
Some of them look like they're gonna beat the crap out of you.
You're probably too young to remember this guy, but there's always a guy called Burgess Meredith who'd always have like half a cigar, and he'd be hanging over the ropes, and he'd be the wily old man who'd know it all.
Yeah, he'd identify a champion.
Yeah.
That's it.
There's definitely people like that in the boxing gym. 100%. It's quite a funny environment. I mean, even for more context, you had literally all walks of life there. My dad was a police officer, so going into a boxing gym, he was always a little bit wary, thinking like, "Oh, we're going into chaos."
Yeah, interesting.
But it was funny because when you're in there, it's this kind of process of you're as good as you are at boxing, like, and everything else doesn't really matter. And that's what you were there to do. You were there to get fit. You were there to enjoy the boxing.
Yeah,
I suppose it's a really good way, when you think about it, of communicating with all aspects, a whole range of people, isn't it? Because the risk is otherwise, you end up sticking in your own lane with people who are a little bit like you. So therefore, you all think, but going to the gym, there must have been such a wide variance of people that you have to get on with them all, don't you, really? So it's probably a really good communication skill builder at a young age.
And was it the boxing that put you on the path to then go and study more about sports, health, wellness, that's taken you into it as a career? Was that kind of a leader?
Yeah, it really sparked an obsession for me of like optimal human health, because I'll never forget a coach saying to me that boxing is you're presenting the optimal version of yourself to be able to compete. And that was kind of, that really sparked it for me. And I was boxing during my GCSEs, running in the morning before school, training after school. And I started to also think, well, you can't just box. Everybody always talks about what's your plan B, what's your backup plan. So that came for me at college, where I could box for half the day. It was an apprenticeship where you studied sports for half the day, and then you got to box for the rest of it. And it was either boxing or strength and conditioning. So you were put into an environment where some of the lads got onto the GB squad for they were on that kind of pathway. They're now signed with the likes of Frank Warren now and Ed Hearn. So others did really well. Others of us, went down our own routes into more the studying aspects of things. But that's for me where it came from. But to touch on what really pushed me into the science, that I didn't fully understand how to train. I didn't understand how to optimize my health. And whilst I was at college, I probably overtrained. And that is essentially where the stress on your body far outweighs your ability to recover. And it's very similar to burnout, very similar to like burnout as described in a business setting. Apart from it manifests more physically. And that's how it did for me. I was training 2-3 times a day. I was below 4% body fat. I was weighing absolutely everything. So my Christmas dinner got weighed. It became a real obsession. And I was driven by people who didn't fully understand science. And I didn't know that at the time. You listen to your coaches. That's it. That's what they're there to do. And when I slowly but surely started to realize, well, I've overtrained here. It's going to take a while for me to get back. That's what kind of lit the spark really for me to go and understand the science, go to university and work with people who are more qualified from a scientific background to give people the proper support.
And it's funny, you have this phrase optimal human health, and obviously it's not just the physical aspect of training. It's what we eat, the nutrition, how we process it. It's everything. And I think we are getting way more smart about looking at us as an entity, and it's not just about going to the gym. It's about how we sleep and what we eat and how we recover. It sounds to me like you're taking quite a holistic view. It's definitely a move on from what would have been described as a personal trainer a few years ago.
Definitely. And I mean, for context on that, personal training as a qualification is a BTEC level qualification. And that's what I really try to advise people with, that a PT will teach you from their level of expertise. They can't teach you past what they don't know. And when you're looking at how to improve your own health, and majority of the professionals I work with have this understanding that everything is far more holistic, it's multifactorial. There's so many things that go into it. You can't just be simply one thing that they need. Then they start to understand the process far more. But if you just limit yourself to somebody who is coming from that place where they don't have expert knowledge, they aren't looking at your nutrition, your physical health, your mindset, your recovery outside, actually how you are managing stress, you're never really going to quite get the results that you want.
You touched on burnout and what that looks like in terms of if you're exercising too much, you don't recover, that puts you on that path. You kind of had an experience yourself of this, didn't you, back in 2022? And I'm only interested in your experience because there's quite a lot of talk in dentistry at the moment about people who are either suffering or exhibiting the signs of burnout. So what did it look like for yourself?
So the initial one with overtraining syndrome, it manifests in very similar ways as regular burnout does as well. Overtraining syndrome is basically you push your body past the point of recovery, and it takes prolonged periods of recovery for you to get back to baseline. Because for people to adapt, you stress the body, you recover, you get better. People often have this conception that you get fitter in the gym. You actually don't. The adaptation occurs during recovery, and recovery is both nutrition, it's reducing stress, it's managing stress, and it's also sleep, all these different things that go into it. Burnout for me in 2022 looked like, and people listening to this podcast might be able to resonate, I was coaching amateur and professional boxing, because I couldn't let go of the boxing identity that I've built for many years of people thinking I could beat them up. I was still personal training on the gym floor and personal training, so in a coaching setting. I was teaching exercise classes, I was working with athletes. I had a separate business where me and my brother had created one where we were delivering the personal training qualification, because we wanted to go far above and beyond what the baseline qualification is. We said it's not good enough. We need to upskill people there. And then I was also running my coaching business that I now have and I now solely focus on. Doing all of those things just meant I was working absolutely ridiculous hours. It was truthfully driven by fear again. It was that fear of failure. And if I'm doing so many different things, I can't possibly fail. And it came up for me as this sense of, I think it came from a mental thought process of nothing was ever going to be enough and I needed more constantly. So I could never switch off. I think that's like the baseline of where it came from. Physically, it manifests as it did in 2015, 2014, when I was around 17, 18 years old. It's just fatigue. It's almost like I described it as being tired in my bones back in like that time. Like you could just never fully feel like you were recovered, no matter how much sleep you got, no matter how many days off, you just still felt like you were burning the fuel.
Wow.
Oh, interesting if from a dental point of view, of people sort of go, oh yeah, and then that feels familiar, because I think they don't think about stuff like that, do they? So maybe spotting the signs before.
And I think that's the useful thing, isn't it? Hearing you describe that, I bet there's lots of people who are saying, oh, actually, I might be exhibiting some of those signs. I hadn't really thought about it.
I just thought I was tired.
Yeah, I was just worn out. But I mean, at the moment in dentistry, there's quite a lot of talk about systemic health, and a guy that we've had on the podcast, Miguel Stanley from Portugal, he talks a lot about oral inflammation and how that affects your overall body. And then I thought, when I thought about that and knew that we would be talking to you, I think that your traditional personal trainer would be focused on fitness, whereas you've clearly gone way beyond that, and you're looking at fitness, nutrition, and mindset. And is that kind of the modern way of thinking, and you can't just take one of those out of the equation and it not have an impact on the others?
Yeah, you can't do 50 push-ups or whatever.
So when you work with clients, is it kind of we're going to look after all of you as opposed to just pick out one element? Is that your approach?
Exactly, and it's always defined by the results that they want. And it's me laying out that process and helping them understand the process that they need to go through and what needs to change physically, nutritionally, and mindset-wise as well. And then it's plugging those gaps. And quite often...
Is that quite hard, George, sometimes with people who come and they say, I just want to be fit. And you say, well, that's great, but actually you need to do this and this, and it's all interlinked. And they're almost like, no, I don't want to give up my sausage sandwich or whatever.
I just want a beach body.
I just want the beach body. That's it. Great. It must be quite a challenge sometimes to talk people to get them to accept it. Is that right?
100%. The first thing that I do before I work with anybody is we have a call, and in that call, it's me understanding what does this person value most in life, how is their health linked to their experience of what they value most in life, and how would improving it improve that experience. A lot of fitness and the fitness industry comes from bodybuilding, comes from six packs, beach body, as you mentioned there, and it's almost forcing people into this one way of thinking about fitness and health, that if I'm fit and healthy, I need to just look this way. But
so it's
really,
almost like a stereotype.
Exactly. And that's what a lot of what I see, like people go to a personal trainer so they can get that beach body, holiday ready, all this kind of stuff. But realistically, like for each individual person, we all have what we value most. We all have our own personal experience. And when we can link how our health is going to improve that experience and reduce the limitations that we're currently feeling around that experience, all of a sudden health is then personalized, and it becomes far more important to build a lifestyle around that specific to that, rather than just having generic programs that just don't work long term.
And do you find that because of the preconceived ideas of what's been built up through this industry, is it challenging for you to get people to buy into this concept where it is all joined up and it is a kind of a triangle, and we need to make sure that each of those points of the triangle are being looked after?
I'd imagine people just don't, they want to get fit by going down the gym, but don't necessarily want to change some of the other.
I think the way the world is these days,
that's probably harder.
When everyone's looking for the quick fix. Everybody's looking at a before and after on Instagram and going, oh, amazing, 42 days. Went from being a an old fat bloke to a young fit bloke. Look at that, amazing. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? That you need to allow time for the change to happen, but also do it in a way which is sustainable. And that's kind of that's counter to the way most things are being presented in the world at the moment. Everything's quick. We all want a quick fix.
I often joke that my job as a coach is just to constantly point at reality for people, and that is done through multiple ways. It's through explaining and helping them understand the science. It's helping them understand the process that they need. I always say, like, I never tell anybody what they want to achieve. I'm very good with the questions that I ask to make sure that we've defined the end goal together, and it's something that they really do want. So then reverse engineering that process. It's not like I'm telling them to do anything that they don't want to do. That's what they want to do, and I'm simply laying out that map in front of them and saying, this is how you get there. We can change it as many times as we want. But unless you are an exception to science, which I've never met anybody who is, this is how it's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, there's different vehicles that people can take to get to that end result. And yes, they can do it as quickly as they want and starve themselves and all these extreme methods. But I always ask people, if what you're going to do to get that result, can you see yourself doing that in a year's time? If not, it's probably not going to last, because you'd have built habits around something that you're never going to sustain. So it makes no sense.
Yeah, it must be quite interesting. I was suddenly sitting here thinking, when we go anywhere, I don't know, it's the same as me. You go there and you meet people you don't know, and they go, "So what do you do?" And you go, "Oh, well, we value and sell dental practices and do finance." And people go, "Oh, right." But I'd imagine it would be you're
we can clear a room. Yeah. Honestly, we can clear a room, us guys.
I imagine you're a bit like a doctor or somewhere where someone says, they say, "What do you do?" So, well, I'm, health and wellness. No, oh, well, actually, I've got a problem, or what could I do? And is it quite hard to get away from it in a way? And sometimes you're out, you might be out, I don't know, with your girlfriend or whatever. And all you want to do is be George, and then someone asks you a question, and boom, how many press ups can you do or something?
It's funny that you say that, because that's one of the reasons I don't call myself a personal trainer, because that tend to, before clear a room, oh, you're one of those. You're one of those people who just shout at people. Whereas now with health and wellness, as you say, it's far more, it's far more like a doctor's perspective, like, oh, okay, so you help people with the health, and especially when they start seeing the results that I post on social media, it's, oh, well, how can I do that?
I'd imagine that must be what you get. What would you recommend? What can I do?
And that's the truth, isn't it? For lots of people, there's a physical change, isn't it? Whereas in some ways, and I know lots of people that come to you will be looking to achieve a certain physical outcome, but there will also be people who will massively benefit just from eating better food, eating more consistently, avoiding ultra-processed food. And that in turn is going to impact their mindset and their attitude and their confidence and their outlook. And none of that has anything to do with their physical appearance. But we all know that quite often your confidence and how you feel about yourself is linked to your physical appearance. So it's funny how it's very hard to put a before and after of nutrition or mindset, but it's very easy to put a before and after of a physical change.
Yeah,
isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
That's the thing we see.
100%. I've distilled it down into 3 key things that people really want to improve that relate to that experience of life. It's usually confidence. So confidence definitely does come through the physical appearance side of things. But it also comes, and you might have heard this quote before, that confidence is that you have evidence that you are who you say you are, which I absolutely love that quote. It's almost that confidence that I've done exactly what I said I was going to do. There's that element to it as well.
Yeah.
Energy is the second thing. So it's energy levels to do what that person values most. So whether that is showing up to business during the day, whatever it is, operating at 100% so they can drive business forward, but then still have the energy that when they go home, they can enjoy family life as well. That's a real big balance. And then the third thing is long-term health. So not having that fear that things around their long-term health are going to limit their experience of life, whether that is, as you mentioned earlier, with their backs, because they just haven't actually quite looked after their health. So back is going to be a massive limiting factor, whether that's any kind of diseases, whatever it is. It's having that confidence that, do you know what, I've got the knowledge of what I need to do for my physical health, nutrition and mindset to sustain this moving forward. So I am influencing to the best of my ability my long-term health.
I love that point you said about giving 100% at work, but also having 100% available when you get home. Because I think a lot of people don't do that. I think they go all out at work.
It's like one tank, isn't it?
Yeah, and they get home, they're knackered. And the result of that is you don't then have anything left for the most important people in your world, which are your partner, your family at home. Because you've given everything to your business, and you go home, you flake on the sofa and
watch Netflix,
eat some rubbish food and watch Netflix. Whereas actually your point is really important, which is, give everything at work, but make sure you still got something left that when you get home, you get to enjoy the bit outside of that.
Yes, there's no point being super tired, so as you miss out on the good bits, isn't it? Yeah.
How did you find yourself in the niche of dentistry, George? I know you've got a number of dental clients, which is kind of how we came to talk.
So it's quite funny. I talk often about niches in business, and I think one of the best ways I've heard a niche described is that it kind of finds you, and you just kind of all of a sudden wake up and you put out what you want to achieve, and people kind of come as a result of that. And dentistry, it seems, I didn't quite get it. I didn't quite get why was it that I was attracting so many different dentists. But you'll see on my page now, it's business leaders that I work with. I didn't realise that a lot of dentists are self-employed, and that the more dentists I speak to, and you'll probably see this yourself, have this real entrepreneurial kind of thinking process that they want to excel both in dentistry, but they've got this kind of interest in business as well. And they're the people that I tend to work with, people who just want to excel in business. And I feel that comes through me being a business owner myself, challenges that I've had. And I think a lot of the dentistry link comes through my practical application. So my time boxing, working with athletes, in a gym, but also having the science side of things. And I believe that's where dentists are more attracted, because they've got those two elements as well.
They like a bit of science, don't they? Dentists, because they are scientific clinicians in a way. It probably fits better than just do, 100 circuits or whatever it might be, because you're actually explaining it more, if that makes sense. I can imagine that fits quite well, actually, with dentists,
I find the dentists that I work with are very process-driven. You lay the process out, they're very happy to follow, but they have to understand that process, and they want to understand why they're doing it. And once they understand the science, it's then just having the steps laid out.
And are they different than non-dentists?
I'd like to say that all the business leaders I work with have a particular archetype now. They have a similar kind of personality.
So they've all got the same sort of mindset and approach,
That's what I'm finding. And you'd have probably both found this in business yourself, that you just tend to work with people who are similar minded to yourself. And it doesn't happen. You don't force it. It just kind of happens naturally. Because the things you talk about, it just makes sense, doesn't it? If I'm interested in this and I talk,
and I think you select, don't you? I'm sure there's clients that you've wanted to be clients, but you've like, nah, this isn't going to work.
Exactly that. I made the mistake very early on in my career with working with everybody as an early personal trainer and as an early coach. Whereas now I have a process that there's a questionnaire, there's
it's good.
There's a screening process, and I do say no to people, because if they're not going to fit who I'm looking for, I'm not going to get them the result. So my business literally drives forward off results that I get with people. So it's a waste of both of our times.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's painful to work with people that don't really value what you've got. It's just no matter, they might be paying you, but it's like, really, I can't be bothered. It's you're causing me more grief. Great idea. Great.
You said about yourself, George, that your health probably wasn't as good as it is now when you were classified as an elite athlete. And I relate this kind of back to the dentist again in their surgery. I'm sure, dentistry is quite sedentary. We've said they're kind of locked away in their surgery for extraordinary amounts of time, and they don't physically move around that much.
They also use the wheels on their chair.
Well, and they're on chairs that, whilst I think the ergonomics over the years has got way better, it's still not necessarily a natural position to be in. And I was laughing. There's a very well-known dentist, guy called Millard, the singing dentist, and he put a reel up recently and saying that he sometimes feels like he's a bit of a prawn, but by the end of the day, he's curled up. And I'm sure lots of dentists would relate to that. Are there some tips for dentists on a day-by-day basis that they could use? So, because I guess if people can't come to you and they go on a journey and a program with you, that's perfect. And lots of people, hopefully over time, will find what works for them. But just on a day-by-day basis, are there things that dentists could do just to make sure that they're having a slightly better day than they would?
Interesting, yeah.
It's a really great question, and it's a question I've been asked multiple times, and my answer probably is never the one that people want, because there's definitely, if you are spending 8-9 hours hunched up in your desk, you then have to match that to counterbalance the strength deficiencies that you'll have. So it's then highlighting the importance of strength training and weight training, not just to look good, like a lot of people use it for, but actually for overall physical health. There's so much research out now how resistance training, so weight training in the gym, minimum once or twice per week, has so many significant health benefits, both physically, so for problems like with your back, but also reducing a lot of the causes of mortality as well, so diseases, and reducing risks of so many different things. So my main piece of advice is highlighting that importance and breaking that down into your week, not seeing it that you have to do an hour, 2 hours in the gym every week, like a lot of the dentists that that have initially come to me, because they have this all or nothing mindset. If I'm going to train, that means I have to do so many hours a week. It's like, no, you can literally do 20 minutes, 30 minutes at an absolute maximum.
But why is it we find that so difficult? Because we all have 24 hours in a day, and we get the bit that there's a bit that where we sleep, and there's a bit where we work, and there's a bit that's left over. But as an average at the moment, people typically, on average, spend 2 hours and 24 minutes a day on social media.
They really?
Yeah.
It's
obscene. So how is it that people can very easily find the time for that, yet they can't find the time for their health, which is going to preserve, decent longevity? Why do we find it so hard?
Because they distract themselves from reality. And that was my point about I'm pointing to reality constantly. When you get people close to actually, well, if your health stays as it is, what are the negative consequences of that? What's the negative consequences that you've already seen when you don't fluff it up as a story and, it's okay, I'm just like this, and it'll get better in the future, and I'll start next week, or I'll start in January. And when you actually move from that story and you start realizing the reality of it, that's when the importance gets highlighted. And I think that's why I think, social media is a fantastic distraction. Netflix is a fantastic distraction as well. And it takes people away from the pain that's in their life, and or something that could be fixed that they're not doing, but it feels far better to hop on social media instead of taking
I'm thinking weighted scrubs. So you have to have a bit of resistance training. I was thinking, I wonder if you could do. What if that work? Would that work, George? Have I just created a whole new range of workwear?
I'd like the IP on it, if so, I'd possibly
have a resistant band, but wear like a headband, and when you lean forward,
but it needs to be backwards, though, doesn't it? You see, that's what I was thinking. Because I thought maybe shoulders, but that'd be no good. No. And I was thinking if you did it in the hem, and then I thought if you wore that like twice a week, that would counterbalance the 3 days a week that you did it.
You did it. Yeah. Are there any?
Random. What a random! You're amazed by that, aren't you?
Yeah,
you're amazed by that.
Are there any?
If you make millions, George, it's my idea, right, mate?
Are there any common traits among your dental clients in terms of the things that they don't get to do, or areas they need to focus on? Is there something that kind of transcends across the profession?
That's a good point.
I'd say the personality type and the way they think is quite similar. I often come across dentists who have this all or nothing approach. They're either all in or they're all out. If they're in on fitness, it has to be so many times a week, or no, I'm just not going to do it, and I'll start when I have some more time. And that's a common. It's actually a thinking distortion from CBT. If you've probably heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, it's an actual distortion of thinking that comes from that. If it's not perfect, it's just not good enough. And that's part of the mindset. It's actually breaking that and saying, well, let's actually look at your week and work out how we can optimize the time you have available. But that's not just training all the time, because as you mentioned, people do enjoy sitting and watching Netflix, and that's definitely an important part of de-stressing, relaxing, because that and people then almost demonize it, and then it's on social media is bad and training is good. Well, if you train too much, that's also bad. So it's then finding a balance that's right for that person. specific to the end result that they've picked.
Mm.
But that limitation early doors with all dentists, it's having that thinking distortion. It's thinking that it has to be perfect. It has to be at 100 miles an hour. It has to be everything aligned. It's breaking past that first, saying, well, what do we actually have with the available time, and building momentum from there, stacking habits on top of each other and making it just really, really simple.
But what, like I say, what you say is right in that both of those outlooks can be damaging, because if it's all or nothing, all could get them to a place where you were, which is utter exhaustion, because they're just literally on it all the time, and the nothing's no good because you don't start. And sometimes you need to take the small step to start, but not then turn it into an obsession where it's literally all you're doing and all you're focused on.
It makes sense, doesn't it? And, with all of that and the psychology, why you're a health and wellness coach, not a PT.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more than just, doing reps and getting a beach body, isn't it? It's like, it's amazing.
I think it's a more sustainable way of building your life as well.
Yeah,
because you're focusing on lots of different elements that mean that you're better as a person, and your mind is better, you're physically better, you're eating the right sort of food. It just seems a more grown up, sensible way of going about it. But I also get your point that it does require explaining and walking people through the process so they understand it, as opposed to say, well, no. I thought I was just going to look like the guy in the picture.
Yeah, instantly,
isn't it? That's the difference.
Liposuction.
George, we get quite a lot of younger people listen to this podcast, so students or younger dentists. You're an entrepreneur, you've got your own business. Lots of these people have an ambition to buy a dental practice or start a dental practice or move into business in some capacity or other. What would you say is your own key takeaway based on your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Takeaway with a health and fitness.
Yeah, of course. It's a very green, very lean, not processed takeaway.
Yeah.
If you're asking, I love a Domino's, but truthfully, with entrepreneurship, and you both will know this even better than I do in business, all businesses is solving a problem to a question. So giving an answer to a question, that's all you're doing. You're really just solving problems. And what the advice I probably would have wanted earlier doors wasn't what business are you going to do and what vehicle are you going to do it in, but what problem do you want to solve, what questions you want to answer, because then the business almost takes care of itself and you find a way, because you can then constantly innovate to create that solution, as opposed to thinking I'm a coach and that's what I do and that's my business, or I'm going to teach personal trainers because I'm a teacher. It's more so thinking, well, what's the actual problem I want to solve, and innovating to work out the best solution to that, because otherwise you just fit into the box of being like everybody else. And that in business doesn't really win the game of business.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Just out of interest, does your approach only work on a one-to-one basis, or are there sufficiently common behaviours among people where it would work in a group setting or not?
Yeah, so I do group setting coaching as well, and that's one of the questions I'm constantly updating and answering. So I have an education platform alongside my coaching, and it's more so building up the process around it, because what I'm finding is that not so much that people need just one-to-one application, they just need questions answered. And how they get answered, whether it's me telling them, whether it's them using a resource, whether it's seeing the actual evidence in front of them, they just need that question answered. So that's more constant.
Oh, cool. I just think for you, it becomes more scalable, but also depending on the sort of person you are, I think there's still people out there who might find it quite intimidating to work with somebody on a one-to-one, whereas in a group setting, sometimes it provides access to a wider pool of people.
Definitely, 100%.
Interesting.
It's the scalability question that I constantly ask as well, because how can I scale me?
Yeah,
that's right.
That's my next phase of business that I really need to answer.
Right, yeah. George, we've got 2 more questions for you before we can let you go. And everybody gets asked these questions, and you're going to be no different. So our first question for you is, if you could be a fly on the wall in a situation, where would you be and who'd be there?
fly on the wall in a situation. I said before we started I was going to let this flow, so I'm going to literally tell you the thing that comes to mind, because I've been thinking about this a lot over the past few days, because I've seen some of your other podcasts. Truthfully, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of the government conversations. So I don't go too profound, but honestly, I recently listened to the Boris Johnson podcast, and
what about Unleashed?
Yeah, and I was and he was on Diary of a CEO, and I was just amazed to listen to his take on things. And I kind of quite often sit there after listening to people like thinking like, wow, is that really how they do things? Is that like really it? So honestly, I would love to be a fly on the wall and just sit and listen to some of the conversations, because I genuinely think I'd be like gobsmacked at it. Because you think they've got it together, you think they've got it solved, but like quite clearly, they don't.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Was he really going to launch a commando raid to try and get some drugs back, or whether it's our vaccines, isn't it? Bloody hell.
Yeah, but they are just people. They are just people trying to work it out, as most of us are. But they just do it on a national level.
Yeah, where it's visible.
Yeah. And if you could meet somebody, George, who would you like to take the opportunity and sit down? And
living or dead?
Yeah.
Right now, because it changes, I listen to a lot of different people, but right now I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle. You might have seen his book, The Power of Now. That's one of the most interesting things I've listened to recently. And it's funny coming from me, from a real science. I've got a master's degree in science.
Yeah.
I say that, but yeah, his book, I thought it's a really interesting perspective on things.
Brilliant. And you're right as well. It does change over time, because I think we're asking this question of you now, and in 2 years you'll be different, so you'll probably have a different outlook, and in 10 years time again. So I think that's really good to capture the thought that it is for now, because some people kind of answer it thinking this is my only ever answer for life, but it isn't. It's just at the moment we're asking the question, it's that person, which is quite important. George, thanks for your time today.
Brilliant, lovely.
It's been really interesting,
enlightening. Yeah,
I think it's really good. And I think I hope the takeaway for people from this is the fact that just start. You can change yourself, and you can move from one place to another. And I love that bit you said about it doesn't need to be obsessive and all in, and it doesn't need to be nothing. There's a whole blend of options in the middle there, and people can kind of move in the right direction if that's what they want. What we'll do as well is, if you could send over a link to yourself, we'll whack that in the show notes as well. So if people have any questions about how you might be able to help them, or they might have general questions about their own lifestyle and health, and I'm sure you'll be able to help them.
Crowdfunding for weighted scrubs.
Exactly. The next venture, here it comes. You heard it here first.
What would we call it? Cheers, George.
Thanks, cheers, George. Look after yourself.
Thanks, man.
Really good. Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.